As we walk around the north end of Tel Es-Sultan, or ancient Jericho, one can see featured the early Bronze II, about 3000 to 2700 BC, wall standing at the south end of Kenyon's 1950s Trench Number 2. As you view this north end of the Tel, here is a quick summary of 9 major stories about Jericho from the Tanakh and the New Testament. First, there is the story of Rahab of Jericho and the spies. After Israel had trekked through the wilderness for 40 years from Sinai, they camped southeast of Jericho up on the plains of Moab on the top of the east side of the Rift Valley in Jordan. Joshua sent out spies to scope out Jericho, Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 to 21. The spies engaged Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute, and she protected them, hiding them on the roof under some flax, and sending the king of Jericho on a wild goose chase to catch them as they allegedly fled east 6 miles back toward the Jordan River. She offers a tremendous confession of faith and lets the spies down with a cord out the window of her house, which was connected to the wall of the city. She was later protected by the spies by putting a red cord in her window, and ultimately she becomes the matriarch of both David and Jesus. Matthew chapter 1. What a story of God's grace. Second, the Israelites crossed the Jordan River on dry ground with the water blocked north of Adam, modern Damiah, 18 miles north of Jericho. Bryant Wood notes mudslides stopping up the Jordan have happened at least 5 times in recorded history. The Israelites camped at Gilgal, where they celebrate the March/April Passover. Males are circumcised and the manna stops, Joshua chapter 5. They then are instructed by God to take the ark and walk around Jericho silently once a day for 6 days. Then, after walking around Jericho 7 times on the 7th day, they sounded the trumpets, and the walls collapsed, letting them go straight up into the fallen city. Joshua chapter 6. They were not to take any of the plunder of the city, but rather burn the city, dedicating it to the Lord as the first city taken in the Promised Land. Joshua made a curse that the city not be rebuilt. Joshua chapter 6, verse 26. Third, King David's humiliated envoys were told to wait in Jericho after returning from the Ammonites until their beards had grown back. 2 Samuel chapter 10. David then sends out Joab to attack Rabbah of the Ammonites, during which time David falls into sin with Bathsheba. Fourth, centuries after Joshua's destruction of Jericho, Hiel rebuilds Jericho in the time of King Ahab, about 850 BC, at the cost of his firstborn son, just as Joshua's curse had dictated. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 34. Fifth, after Elijah had been taken up into heaven in Transjordan, Elisha returns to the company of prophets living in Jericho. 2 Kings chapter 2. Elisha then heals the bad water of the spring of Jericho by throwing salt into it, proclaiming that the water of this spring would never cause death again and make the land unproductive. Sixth, after the Babylonians broke into Jerusalem, Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, about 586 BC, fled and was captured in the plains of Jericho. He was then hauled off to Riblah and forced to watch his children killed. He was then blinded and taken off to Babylon. 2 Kings 25, Jeremiah chapter 39 and 52. Moving into the New Testament, seventh, Jesus visits Jericho twice. Once he meets Zacchaeus, Luke chapter 19, who climbs a sycamore tree to see Jesus. Jesus goes to Zacchaeus' house over the objections of the people who despise his role as chief tax collector. Zacchaeus confesses that he will give half of his possessions to the poor and repay anyone he had stolen from. Jesus announces that salvation had come to Zacchaeus that day. Jesus then travels from Jericho up to Jerusalem for his triumphal entry as he entered Jerusalem riding on a donkey. Jericho was once again the gateway to Jerusalem and the hill country of Judea. Scenario 8 is an interesting story showing the meticulous historicity of the biblical text in the Synoptic Gospels. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 29, and Mark chapter 10, verse 46, it says that Jesus was leaving the city of Jericho. He encountered blind men who called for him as the Son of David to have mercy on them and heal them. Luke chapter 18, verse 35, however, says Jesus met the blind man while approaching the city of Jericho. How can he meet these blind men while he is leaving Jericho, and yet while he is approaching Jericho? It turns out there are two sites for Jericho at the time. One is ancient Jericho, Tel Es Sultan, that we are looking at, and another a little over a mile away to the southwest on the banks of Wadi Kelt, where Herod had built what has also been called, quote, Jericho, end quote. There he was visited by Antony and Cleopatra. Thus Jesus encountered the blind men in the 1 mile in between as he was leaving Tel Es Sultan, ancient Jericho, and as he was approaching Roman or Second Temple Jericho as he set his sights on his final trip to Jerusalem. In the ninth or final scenario, Jericho was part of the geographical setting for the parable of the Good Samaritan. The traveler was journeying through the Judean desert from Jerusalem going down to Jericho, 670 feet below sea level. The famous road, Route 1 today, was called Ma'aleh Adumim. The victim was accosted and beaten by thieves, Luke chapter 10, verses 30 and following. Many students today make the journey down the Roman road leading from the Mount of Olives down to Jericho to this day. It is about 6 to 8 hours for the 15-mile trek. Well, that is a brief summary of the canonical connections between the site of Jericho and the biblical text. This, quote, oldest, end quote, and lowest city, 670 feet below sea level, was a key east-west gateway into and out of the promised land for Joshua, Elisha, Zedekiah, the Good Samaritan, and Jesus.